All right, you maggots, listen up. Now, I want to tell you a story about RCA. And I got hired in there through unemployment. The kid, Robert Wood, that was his name, same as the painter. He was the personnel guy. He gave me the most amount of money he could give me because I had experience. He got me in there, and I started working there. And at the time I was working in RC, they were getting ready to close down. They wanted that area for part of Route um, 280. Yeah, 280. Route 280. They needed parts of the complex for Route 280. There were so many things going on. But anyway, down in Woodbridge, the engineers, in order to keep their job, they were making changes to the tubes to save money. Any type of gold plating in the tube, which increases the amount of emission, so the tube has more gain. They took the gold out, and then they fudged the tests. And he did this with a bunch of tubes. Then they retired. They moved the stuff up to Harrison from Woodbridge, New Jersey, and now the shit is coming back. All the tubes that they were producing uh, start bouncing back. The customers are saying it doesn't work in the circuit, and these guys are like TV repairmen, and they're like spending days with a tube, wondering why they have an old tube in their caddy that works, but the new tubes won't work. That's because they took the gold out. There's less gain, and it shows up like an IF tube in the picture circuit. In other words, the picture will have snow in it, even though you got a good signal, because the tube doesn't have enough gain, and the signal to noise ratio is off. So our engineers are running around like they're chasing their tail because they have more tube types now under their belt. See, an engineer had like 10 tube types that he overlooked, and then overlooked or watched over, and he would work with the production guys, and they would get bad runs of tubes, sometimes 50,000. They put them out on the courtyard and run it over with we call them steamrollers. But anyway, they'd run back and forth over them. Then they would scoop that up and send it to a landfill. But that was a part of making tubes. All the different tests as they went along. Sometimes a girl would leave, or a set of girls would leave out a certain grid, like a G3 grid. And the boss would say, we'll put that grid in at the end of the week. And they put racks and racks and racks of preformed insides of the tube in racks, and then somehow those tubes would never come back down, and the girls would add G3 into it. They'd go off and they get sealed. Maybe in final test, they would find out they didn't have enough gain, or there was noise, and I told you that guy Ken Recor, he would sit there on his chair, and he'd hold a tube over a waste paper basket, and he would hit it with a hammer or a screwdriver and break it in his hand. And then he would pull the tube apart to pieces and set them down on a piece of paper. And then he'd write it up that the tube is missing G3, grid 3. And I think grid 3 in some cases was a suppression grid. Kept electrons from bouncing back from the plate towards the cathode. Well, anyway, it eliminated noise in the tube. And you can do all your tests for gain and everything, and the tube will pass. And then what will happen is the person will test for noise, or the customer will realize they got noisy tubes when it's in the television set. And then they start sending them back. And then what they do is they send someone down to the warehouse, and they pull 100 tubes from that batch. And then they send them up to me and the other guy, and we test them, and they pass. And then they go through a couple other guys, and they get to Kenny. He breaks it open. He realizes G3 is missing. So you got the guys in Woodbridge who have taken the gold out of the tubes. They cheated on the test in order to make them pass. They got extra money for saving money, but they produced thousands and thousands and thousands of tubes, and they're in the warehouse, and they're no goddamn good. So they have these big meetings, and everybody knows what's going on. They know it was the guys in Woodbridge, but no one wants to say it. So they all come up with they pass these resolutions. and they decide they want calibration more than they had. So of course, remember I said I'm that guy. So I'm sitting there. I have techs in 3 different departments, but the boss calls me in and he goes, Kenny wants you to work with him. I said, what? He goes, I go talk to him, because the dandy boss really didn't understand what we were going to do. So anyway, I go out, and Kenny says, we're going to start calibration in this department. And that's why I have this meter here. I want to explain to you, you can have this meter brand new, perfectly calibrated, but if the tech stands it up like this, if the meter movement's really good, this one is really good, it's balanced, the mechanism is balanced, so the reading won't change if you stand it on its end. But there are meters, including RCA's meters, some of the Westons aren't made to be stood up on end. There were Western Electric, Weston meters, there were other companies too that made really good, Simpson meters were really good too. But in other words, when they're at the meetings, somebody will get up there and say, well, I noticed when the guy stands the meter up, it doesn't read correctly. So that becomes a problem. So now all the meters start getting stickers on them that says, only use this meter for calibration when laying down. So now all the meters have to go down to the meter department. And I told you once before, they had these giant 5-foot meter movements with all kinds of plug-in resistors for different different voltage ranges. And in RCA, they had a giant complex, and they had what they called a taxi system, or they actually called it a trolley system. And you had to come outside, and at a certain time, a van would come, not a van, a Volkswagen bus would come by, and you would show the guy a ticket, and he would get in. He would drive you 3 or 4 blocks away. You get out, you go in and you sign in, you go to the department you're going to help. It was a whole rigmarole. So I was very busy to start with in RCA, because I was retesting all the tubes that had been fudged. And a lot of the test beds, we'd need more test beds. We had them, but they were burnt out because the guy that had the job before me, he didn't fix anything. He just kept putting it in piles. So the dandy, my boss, wanted everything fixed and looking brand new. I had that guy in one ear. I had the engineers coming up to me, and they knew what was going on. Finally, they started telling me, we know these guys pulled this quick one on the company, and we don't want to get him in trouble. So I have all this extra work. I had a lot of work to start with. Now I have all this extra work. So one of the things they did to me was they made me take these different meter movements down to the meter lab. And I told you, inside the meter lab, you got 2 giant meter movements. They're 6 foot across. They actually can move with the magnetic pull of the earth. They have to be calibrated every so often. And the 2 guys that sit between those meters, they don't talk to each other. They hate each other. So you go down there and you have a ticket, and one guy, you give the meter to the guy, and he puts certain voltages into it, and he asks you which way the meter's going to lay when you use it, and you have a sticker on it, and then he tells what percentage the accuracy full scale, and it's like it has to be 1% or they don't use the meter. So I have to go down, and they had me for a while sitting in waiting for the trolley, and then I went to the big boss. I said, look, that thing's a block and a half away. It takes me an hour to get there because I have to wait in one spot for the trolley coming one way, the trolley going another way. I said, I want you to sign. So he signed a waiver that I could walk from my bench through the company and go to the other department instead of taking the trolley. And that made life a little bit easier for me. But I just wanted to tell you, Ken Recor was in charge of this calibration, and we had no real good quality calibration. So he came up with the fact that you could use the AC line. Now the AC line, the 60 cycles, is very accurate because it has to hook on the national grid system, and the phase of your sine wave when you put your generating plant on the grid has to be exactly the same frequency and the same phase as the other generators on the grid system that are in other states. And there is a shift in phase as you go through time, through different states. There's different grid systems. We're not all on the same big grid. I think there was an eastern, northeastern grid and a south. Well, anyway, yet the 60 cycle line is damn accurate. So Ken says to me, you have to set up a scope in Eliciju. And I knew that. And the other guys in the area, they're hanging over me. And one guy was a little, I can't say what he was because of woke, but he was creepy. And he put his hands where they didn't belong, and you had to punch him in the head to get rid of him. They would come over, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And I would say, I have to set up for Eliciju pattern. Well, how do you know how to do that? Now, some of these guys had a first-class FCC license. And in order to get that, you know how to do a Eliciju pattern. But they only memorized the answers so they could pass the test. So I knew how to set it up. And we take the 60 cycle line, we put it into horizontal input of the scope, or vertical, whatever. And then in the horizontal, you put the frequency you're testing. And if you're testing a frequency oscillator, you put it at like, say 1,000 hertz. And you're going to have so many peaks on the waveform between 60 cycle and 60 cycle and 100 hertz or 1,000 hertz. You're going to get a certain pattern on the screen, and the 60 cycle is the reference, and then you can see the drift of the oscillator versus the markings on it. So you have to test each frequency generator in the place in 3 different bands using the pattern against the 60 cycle. See, what we should have had was a marker generator that was crystal calibrated, but we didn't have it. So Ken come up with a way of using the 60 cycles. And we were at least making steps forward to start calibration. And the whole time I'm doing all this, and I got these stickers, and of course the dandy, the one boss, he's worrying more about how the stickers look. I'm telling you, you're in this mess, and there's so many other people that caused the mess. Like the guy I replaced, he stopped. His cart had all these meter movements and batteries, and all the batteries were dead. He would go test them. He would go make believe he was testing the tubes, and he would write down the values. He'd make the values up because he knew approximately what they'd be. So I take the job, and I'm going along. I'm noticing none of these meters, everything's reading 0. So I started checking the batteries, and I went to the lead tech, and I told him, and he goes, yeah, that's because so-and-so there, he hasn't really been doing his job. And so as I start really testing the tubes I'm putting up for tests are now coming up back with real results that match the results of the other department. Now those engineers start realizing that something was wrong. And it was that little man that had the job before me. And that's what he was. He was a little man. He had a hairdo from 1950s early. He had that duck back hairdo. And he was lost in the past. He was very unhappy that he didn't move forward in the company. He did get promoted finally from the job I took of his to the other side. He never got another raise because he sucked. And he was very bitter, old little man. He wasn't an old man. He was a bitter little man. Well, I put new batteries in his stuff, and I start getting different results, which start matching what the engineer was expecting to see. Now the engineers start coming in, and they're like, what did you do? And I said, I changed the batteries. And then they start investigating how long the batteries have been in that cart, and they haven't been changed. And that became part of the you had to prove that you're changing the batteries every so often. That became more work for me. And now our results now matches the other departments. So those guys are coming over and saying to me, we were wondering, now that guy that screwed it all up, he's over there with them, and they know he sucks. And this is what life really is like. So I'm in the middle of all this nonsense, and I did get it straightened out. But I started going to the big boss. I said, look, I'm walking over to that building with the meter, and I might leave it there and walk back, go back to work, go back, get the meter later on. I said, I got hundreds of meters, and I got work I have to do. And We don't have anybody else with your skill sets. And yeah, that's because it's union, and they never pushed anybody, and they never fired anybody for screwing up. Like that guy, he never changed the batteries. And then he sits over there smoking a cigarette, and he used to squat down like he was in the military. And he's smoking a cigarette, and he's talking about me to this other guy indirectly, just to piss me off. And because he goes, oh, the guy thinks he's an engineer. I was doing what I was told to do. So funny. Now his review comes up, and his boss became a friend of mine, and he was always bringing over stuff for me to fix for him instead of his guys, and they hated me. And he cut this guy a new a-hole. He told him basically he was a big baby, and he wasn't going to give him a raise. And basically, if he wanted more money, to go somewhere else. It was funny. And he come over and he's almost crying. He's like, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Now you worry about how incompetent you are, and then you didn't do your job. Now, when you want more money because you're going to go home to your wife and tell her that you got a 0 review, you're in a new salary category, and you can get more money, but you don't get more money because you suck. But this is the stuff I went through, and this is a Weston meter, and I do believe Weston, was it Pennsylvania? No, I got to put my glasses on. This was a big company, man. They actually they actually sent radiation through metal in order to, let's see, USA. Oh man, my eyesight. Wait, I got too many layers of. Oh, Newark, New Jersey, right where I was born. Holy crap. Okay, I know Weston was up in Pennsylvania, but in other words, at one point Weston was over in Newark, New Jersey. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you some of the stuff you go through. And when you read the news and you see about the Boeing, about the airplanes falling apart, I had this one neighbor, when you would give him an article like that, he would tell you it's bullshit, it's not true. And he would tell you about these rows of filing cabinets. He had this story that he would just go into that he saw at some airport or whatever, repair center, how meticulous they were. And then this could never happen, because I got in an argument with him over the jack screw. There's a screw that moves the elevator on the plane up and down. And the guy that was supposed to replace them didn't do it. He took the money, he took the overtime, and it caused the plane to crash. And they came back on him, and they got him. And I had the article, and this guy kept arguing with me that couldn't have happened. But in later years, I realized the guy was a wackadoodle. I used to call him Professor Backwards after a while. I'm the guy that gets into the problem and straightens it out. And they expect me to. And they pull me in, they slow me down by pulling me into these meetings. And they'll say, they bring like 10 new engineers in, and they want me to stand up there and explain to these engineers what I found. Now, it's been written up, but I have to stand there and go over it again. And then they're raising their hands and they're asking me these nitpicking little questions to justify their crappy freaking job. And they're all going to be laid off because RCA is going to close anyway. And I can talk about RCA because it finally went under. And you can't believe the stories about them. The women in the warehouses, they were turning tricks in their cars at lunchtime. So you couldn't go out to your car at lunchtime without special pass. And that's every time somebody would screw up, it would cause me more work or a problem and stuff. It's hilarious stuff. And that's what you go through. And when you become a key guy, or as they called me, a company guy, you get more and more responsibility. And if you're smart, you go into the office, you say, I want a raise. Well, you're not due for a raise. You said, no, you don't understand. I did this a couple of times. I went in there, I want a raise. You gave me more work. You gave me responsibility. Well, you have to wait for your next raise. No, I'm not going to wait for my next raise. I'm going home right now and stay there if you don't start the paperwork. See, I work for places where they could give you a raise at any time, but they would lie to you and tell you that basically you got to wait till next review time. That's review time. That isn't give me a raise, I need the money, or you owe me more money because you gave me another job time. In other words, that's what I went through. I started sticking up for myself because this one guy found this one boss would make copies on the copy machine, and he'd go light a cigarette or answer a phone, and this other guy would run over and push the copier machine and print a copy of what the guy was copying, and then he'd reset the copier, and you'd see that guy run back out. And he swore he heard the copier running, but he would check the counter, and it would, well, anyway, this guy did it. And well, he got a hold of what people made in the shop, and he gave me a copy. He says, "You're being screwed." So I immediately went up into the office. I told the guy, "I want this amount of money." "Well, we can't just give you that." "I'm going home." "What?" "I'm going home." And then one time, I refused to sign my review, and the guy said to me, "You don't have to sign your review." I said, "Okay." He sent it to the other building, and they called him up, and then they found out he broke procedure, and he got his asshole cut. So then he said to me, "I'm not gonna pay you $20-something thousand a year to fix keyboards." Now, it wasn't a keyboard; it was a complete computer on one circuit board with a keyboard. But that's how these bosses would talk. They'd say, "That's nothing more than a keyboard." Yes, it is. It's got firmware on there. It's a complete computer on a board. But they were so stupid, they didn't even understand what a microprocessor was. We have bosses, they were in electronics, but they changed parts. They didn't really understand how the circuit board was working. Those guys became bosses, and they were the worst. The best boss you could ever have is the guy that's worked his way up through the company. I think that's it. All right, that's it.